Okay, so I had the pleasure of teaching all of you criminal law. So maybe it might be a good idea for anybody who's thinking about studying law here. What did you particularly enjoy about Wadham and the experience at Wadham studying law?
I think I mean the tutors here are all really friendly. I've never gone to a tutorial feeling nervous. Like it's a very relaxing atmosphere, and like yeah, I think that's definitely good. Like the friendliness, it's really helpful here.
I agree. I think especially at the beginning, because you're kind of really scared going into it. Like you're
Yeah.
2 to 1 with an academic. You don't know how it's going to go, but no, it's really good.
Yeah, and definitely like when you think, oh, I'm talking to like an Oxford academic,
Yeah.
it feels like so intimidating. But you know, they're all people and they're all really nice. And
It's good to know
yeah.
a person. Right. Go on, Kim.
I mean, I really enjoyed the tutorials as well. Like they said, it's quite nerve-wracking at the beginning to come into a tutorial, and then you're asked quite like good questions, and you really have to think about what you've learned, what you've read. But also, I would say I've really enjoyed my cohort mates as well. So people in my year, they're lovely. I'm great friends with them. I mean, I even live with the lawyers in the whole year. So it's just really been such a good community and experience.
I guess a really fun thing about Toots with Shazia is her dog Stella is sometimes there. She'll sometimes come along and say hi to you, and that's really fun. Yeah.
We've managed to walk Stella a few times.
Yeah.
That's been great.
Yeah.
So this is all voluntary activity.
In fact,
Yeah.
we're chomping at the bit to get to him.
Yes, yeah, she's very cute. She's kind of cheeky, but
Being cute, exactly. She does have a tendency to sit on the sofa, but I also should say that she's only brought in when students are comfortable with
Yeah,
the dog.
yes.
Yeah, so that's fine. But she is a miniature Schnoodle, so that's part of the offer at Wadham Law is that you get to have contact with a miniature Schnoodle if you would like.
And for me, what I think aside from the friendliness, which is quite universally felt here, it's the academic rigor of the tutorial system here, which is quite something special. It really develops your understanding of the law in areas, sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And when you get in a tutorial, in a small group tutorial for tutors, they can really point out the difficulties and some small details.
This is the bit where I say that Enu won the criminal law prize in his first year. So, yeah. So academic rigour was quite important there, wasn't it? I'm not going to take any credit, obviously. No. Okay. So you've had a really good experience, it seems, in terms of the tutors. The key thing is just to obviously that it hasn't been intimidating. I hope but also at the same time, it's kind of the idea is that you get to talk to us for an hour. We get to talk to you for an hour about the questions, and then sometimes we just go off in tangents. Do you remember those tutorials? And we can go off in tangents, but that's a very good thing, because unfortunately, I suppose that's not a kind of usual experience, I think, for a lot of students outside of Oxford, where you actually get to really delve in and actually do go off at a tangent. And we went on many tangents, but the tangents are still pretty useful. And then as you say, just talking about particular points that you don't understand, but also just having that kind of time to develop your understanding of the actual subject.
To be honest, I kind of enjoyed the first one. I found causation really interesting because like applying to law, it's not really an area of the law you might know about if you haven't studied it, but actually it's really interesting. And like when you do an Oxford tutorial, you don't just like learn the law, you're kind of also looking at those kind of underlying philosophical questions about what makes someone responsible for a crime, and I found that really interesting.
Yeah, that was quite good. I think Reamsley.
I think one of my favourite tutorials was the one about non-fatal offences against the person. I found that topic just anyway really interesting, because I think it's something you see a lot in the news. Like you hear GBH, you don't really know what that means. So I found it interesting learning that anyway. But I enjoyed the tutorial on that, and we kind of spiralled into different conversations.
Yeah, we cover a range of things, so it's a bit sort of probably not appropriate to talk about it. But obviously you're talking about quite a range of activities that are criminal activities, I suppose. And I mean, suffice to say that we can bring in not our own experience of criminality, surely, but kind of just sort of talking about things that you see in the news or things that you might not have understood yourselves. And some, I suppose you get a sort of superficial understanding, don't you, as a layperson about the law, and then things that you might have heard about when you were growing up, or other people were doing. And it's quite a kind of it's quite a wake-up call, I think, in some ways. Let's put it that way. What is a crime and what isn't a crime? And there's a range of activity that we don't necessarily understand that is a crime, really, or rather is really, really interesting and goes into lots of detail. So, yeah. Well, I'm glad you were all mentioning criminal law, which is great. But you also studied other subjects as well, right? So especially the second year. So are there any of your favourite tutorials in the second year?
I mean, I've quite enjoyed sort of like land.
Yeah.
I think that's quite that's quite a unique opinion. But I've quite enjoyed sort of like the tangents that we go on like why land in particular is such an important piece of the law and why it's so separate from everything. It's so unique from everything else. And I think also just the idea of like owning land, what it's like to own land and being able to own land in different like positions.
Yeah.
I think that has been quite enlightening sort of philosophical discussion as well, right? Because land is so central to all of us.
And we should probably talk about the Law Society at Wadham as well, because I think that's obviously another really good thing that we do. And we've got the law hub as well, which you can find details of on the website. But so our annual dinner actually involves our alumni. So let's talk about that and what they've done in terms of helping you in terms of kind of contact with the legal community, particularly in London, and how that's helped perhaps career choices as well. Maybe it might be a good idea to talk about that.
How about we direct that question to the president or to the president of the Law Society?
Well, the Law Society in Wadham's a really good community. I think for multiple reasons. I mean, the main one is that we have this huge network of alumni that's actively engaging with us in the Law Society, and we have a couple of events throughout the year, including a trip to London where we visit, say a solicitor firm or a barrister chamber or the courts or whatever might be planned, and we get a networking session afterwards with a lot of alumni from all different sorts of fields, and you really get a taste of the options you have for a career in private practice or outside of private practice, and that's really nice to venture out and explore your options.
And they get involved in mooting, don't they? So who did we have for our judging for our moot?
We had Lord Justice Holroyd judging our
Appeal judge. But it wasn't intimidating though, was it?
No, he's really friendly.
Really nice.
Owen won Best Mooter, so.
Did you? Well done, Owen. That's brilliant.
Yeah, Lord Justice Howard, he's really nice. Again, it's sort of that thing of like, oh my God, I'm mooting in front of a judge. That feels so scary. But like everyone's really friendly. It's a really nice environment. You get to do something which is, it's a really unique experience. It looks good in your CV, and also it's not scary at all.
Definitely. And we also met him when we went on our annual London trip, so organised by NU a couple of weeks ago. And we got to kind of go behind the scenes at the Court of Appeal, which was really interesting and quite a unique opportunity. And we also went to some barristers' chambers, which I think is really cool because you don't often get that kind of insight. I think it's kind of harder to break into the world of advocacy and being a barrister. You have more clarity on what it's like to be a solicitor, so that was a really good opportunity as well.
Have I got any phrases? I don't think I have.
It's not a phrase. It's always what's the authority, but that's law. That is law. But I really understood the importance of authorities.
And it's always like, and what's the authority on that?
Yeah. Well, quite. Good. It's academic rigour, as NU said.
And then sometimes you're like, don't look at your laptop, look at me. Which is good. You really have to like bring it to the forefront of your mind straight away.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and that's the point though. So it's not. So yeah, I suppose that could it be an upside or a downside? There is nowhere to hide in an Oxford tutorial because there's just two of you usually, and that's why it's really important to make sure it's a really kind of non-intimidating atmosphere for that reason. Because obviously it could be really intimidating, but that also means that you are kind of very present, and you obviously know you're going to be asked questions, and then you're ready for them, including your authorities as lawyers.
Yeah, I think you do develop as well because you realise like then when you're doing your reading what's relevant, what bits to pick out, and so like I felt myself anyway over the course of the year like I hope anyway that I've progressed and I can see the like changes in what I'm kind of looking out for, and that is kind of because you're guided in that way in the tutorials. Yeah.
I mean, I would like to point out this is actually where we have our tutorials.
Yes.
Like, on this couch, like with the laptop on my knees.
Like,
yeah. So it's a very comfortable environment.
Yes. Yeah.
Particularly so in this office.
I mean, with law, like Reem said, I think I've just been really getting much better at reading huge chunks of information and diluting them down into what the key points are, being able to point out those like legal uncertainties, legal debates. I mean, and Wadham in general, I think I'm a much different person than I was 2 years ago. being away from home, being away at uni, I think it's really shaped me very well. And Wadham has been like a really, really genuinely such a great community for me to settle in, for me to ask any questions that I want, and basically just like have a really good time, even though the tutorials are fun but hard.
Fun but hard. I think what was it? And you said to me the first year, I think I asked you a question. I think it was like at Christmas or something, just before breaks. Are you having any fun? And you said, yeah, we're having fun working. And I just thought, well, you know, it was the truth. We're having lots of fun working. So, so I mean, you know, without a doubt, it is a lot of work, right? But it's but as you say, the community itself makes it a much more kind of pleasant experience. I mean, I suppose we might want to just sort of slightly push to so kind of, obviously you have friends in other colleges, don't you? Is there something that's particularly unique, or you think is that we do really well here at Wadham that perhaps, you know, you have heard from other colleges not so much, or that we do, you know, that we are quite good at, that we want to emphasise in terms of anyone coming or thinking about which college to apply to do law?
I think for me, like Kim was saying, Wadham in general is a very welcoming community, but I feel that especially within the law cohort. I think we're all quite tight-knit, like across the year groups. Like we felt so welcomed. At the beginning in Freshers Week, we had a subject social with the second and third year lawyers, and that was actually really nice. We got to meet you guys, and you guys have been obviously like really welcoming to us since then, and we obviously know we can come to you if we're like struggling with anything or need help. And from speaking to people at other colleges, you maybe don't have that sense of like tight-knit community across the year groups. So yeah, I think that's really unique and great for me.
I mean, the Wadham College Law Society, and not to, you know, belabor the point, but I think it's something quite unique. I haven't heard of, you know, as in with my limited knowledge, I don't know of any other college that does it to this scale. And we have often, you know, not just career events, but, you know, socializing parties. We just had a garden party for the finalists last week, and you know, these kind of activities really allow you to get to know your tutors and your friends on a very personal basis, and that's always nice.
Yeah, and also just like getting the judge in for the moot. I don't know any other college which does that. So it's a lot of really good unique opportunities with the law society.
I think maybe one thing that's not relevant to law but very relevant to everything else is that 3 years of housing is provided. Like you're guaranteed housing for all of the whole of your degree. I think like in other colleges that might not be guaranteed. So Wadham, Dorothy Wadham Building, main site, you're guaranteed all 3 years of your degree, like having an accommodation. I think that really takes a weight off of your shoulders.
Yeah. It's a nice building. The Dorothy, it's a nice building. So and it's in a really interesting and kind of lively area of the city, I think. So yeah, it's a good thing.
Academic rigour.
I see that as a really good. Thank you so much.
I mean, I think if you're thinking about studying here, first of all, you have to understand that it's definitely not going to be the easiest thing you've ever done. In fact, I think it might be the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. But I think at the same time, the way that it shapes you as a person, the way that you grow from it, and the things that you learn from it are just incredible. You are never going to have this experience ever again to sit, 2-to-1 to somebody who is quite literally at the top of their field, to discuss with them what's going on in the field. And sometimes when they're really like relevant, like discussions, especially when cases happen, just recently, just a few years ago, or maybe even like some cases happen like the week before, things go down in your tutorial. I think those are incredible experiences that you would just never get anywhere else. And I think that's like a really, really, really good selling point on going to do law at Wadham, especially where the tutors are very happy to discuss everything with you.
And the fact that, getting pressed academically is actually quite enjoyable sometimes. The tutors here are really willing to, go in depth and discuss and really press you on sometimes the fundamental logic and reasoning behind these laws. And, prime example of which is Roman law, which we do in our first year. And Mr. Hackney really, our tutor, really makes it a point to get you to understand what's really going on behind these rules that might seem, slightly disorganized, but there's usually a unifying thread behind them. And sometimes getting it feels enlightening, and it's one of the genuinely enjoyable moments I've had in Wadham.
I think you learn to think in like completely new ways, and to use the word enlightening again, you do kind of see the light at some point, and you're like, oh, actually I've been looking at this all wrong, but you're opened up to a completely new way of thinking, and I think that's really like academically challenging and rewarding in a good way. But kind of aside from academics, I think just the like Wadham law community is super friendly, and that's something I've really, really benefited from. That everyone is just so willing to help, and I think that's something that makes Wadham really unique, and definitely like a big selling point of Wadham law.
I would just say that I think what's really unique about the way we teach stuff at Oxford is there's a much more philosophical approach. So it's not just learning what the law is. You really have to interrogate why the law is the way it is, and maybe if it should be different, and if so, why. And I think that will just make you a better lawyer, because you can have a much more critical perspective on what the law is. And I think that's something really unique about Oxford.